Hello everyone, welcome back to the Yellow Chair Classroom. George's Marvellous Medicine will continue to come as little snips since the story is long and students will enjoy and expect further. Come on, let's jump into the story. Enjoy the awesome two's tug of war. Let's see what's going to happen. George sat himself down at the table in the kitchen. He was shaking a little. Oh, how he hated Grandma. He really hated that horrid old witchy woman. And all of a sudden, he had a tremendous urge to do something about her. Something whooping, something absolutely terrific, a real shocker, a sort of explosion. He wanted to blow away the witchy smell that hung about her in the next room. He may have been only 8 years old, but he was a brave little boy. He was ready to take this old woman on. "I'm not going to be frightened by her," he said softly to himself. But he was frightened, and that's why he wanted suddenly to explode her away. Well, not quite away, but he did want to shake the old woman up a bit. Very well then. What should it be? This whooping, terrific, exploding shocker for Grandma? He would have liked to put a firework longer under her chair, but he didn't have one. He would have liked to put a long green snake down the back of her dress, but he didn't have a long green snake. He would have liked to put 6 big black rats in the room with her and lock the door, but he didn't have 6 big black rats. As George sat there pondering this interesting problem, his eyes fell upon the bottle of Grandma's brown medicine standing on the sideboard. Rotten stuff it seemed to be. 4 times a day, a large spoonful of it was shoveled into her mouth and didn't do her the slightest bit of good, but she was always just as horrid after she'd had it as she had been before. The whole point of medicine, surely, was to make a person better. If it didn't do that, then it was quite useless. So, thought George suddenly, aha, ho hum, I know what I'll do. I shall make her a new medicine, a one that is so strong and so fierce and so fantastic it will either cure her completely or blow off the top of her head. I'll make her a magic medicine, a medicine no doctor in the world has ever made before. George looked at the kitchen clock. It said 10:05. There was surely an hour left before Grandma's next dose was due at 11. "Here we go then," cried George, jumping up from the table. "A magic medicine it shall be."
So gimme a bug and a jumping flea, gimme 2 snails and lizards 3, and a slimy squiggler from the sea, and the poisonous sting of a bumblebee, and the juice from the fruit of the jujube tree, and the powdered bone of a wombat knee, and 100 other things as well, each with a rather nasty smell. I'll stir them up and I'll boil them long, a mixture tough, a mixture strong, and then hi-ho, and down it goes, a nice big spoonful, hold your nose.
There was a round cardboard carton labeled flea powder for dogs. "Keep well away from the dog's food," it said, "because this powder, if eaten, will make the dog explode." "Good," said George, pouring it all into the saucepan. He found a box of canary seed on the shelf. "Perhaps it'll make the old bird sing," he said, and in it went. Next, George explored the box with shoe cleaning materials, brushes and tins and dusters. "Well now," he thought, "Grandma's medicine is brown, so my medicine must also be brown or she'll smell a rat." The way to color it, he decided, would be with brown shoe polish. The large tin he chose was labeled dark tan. Splendid! He scooped it all out with an old spoon and plopped it into the pan. He would stir it up later. On his way back to the kitchen, George saw a bottle of gin standing on the sideboard. Grandma was very fond of gin. She was allowed to have a small nip of it every evening. Now he would give her a treat. He would pour in the whole bottle. He did. Back in the kitchen, George put the huge saucepan on the table and went over to the cupboard that served as a larder. The shelves were bubbling with bottles and jars of every sort. He chose the following and emptied them one by one into the saucepan: a tin of curry powder, a tin of mustard powder, a bottle of extra hot chili sauce, a tin of black peppercorns, a bottle of horseradish sauce. "There," he said aloud, "that should do it." "George," came the screechy voice from the next room, "who are you talking to in there? What are you up to?" "Nothing, Grandma, absolutely nothing," he called back. "Is it time for any medicine yet?" "No, Grandma, not for about half an hour." "Oh, I'll just see you don't forget it." "I won't, Grandma," George said. "I promise I won't." At this point, George suddenly had an extra good wheeze. Although the medicine cupboard in the house was forbidden ground, what about the medicines his father kept on the shelf in the shed next to the hen house? The animal medicines, what about those? Nobody had ever told him he mustn't touch them. "Let's face it," George said to himself, "hairspray and shaving cream and shoe polish are all very well, and they will no doubt cause some splendid explosion inside the old geezer, but what the magic mixture now needs is a touch of the real stuff. Real pills and real tonics to give it punch and muscle." George picked up the heavy 3/4 full saucepan and carried it out of the back door. He crossed the farmyard and headed straight for the shed alongside the hen house. He knew his father wouldn't be there. He was out haymaking in one of the meadows. George entered the dusky old shed and put the saucepan on the bench. He looked up at the medicine shelf. There were 5 big bottles there. 2 were full of pills, 2 were full of runny stuff, and 1 was full of powder. "I'll use them all," George said. "Grandma needs them." Boy, does she need them. The first bottle he took down contained an orange-colored powder. The label said, "For chickens with foul pest, hen gripe, sore beaks, gammy legs, cockroachitis, egg trouble, broodiness or loss of feathers. Mix 1 spoonful only with each bucket of feed." "Well," George said aloud to himself as he tipped in the whole bottle full, "the old bird won't be losing any feathers after she's had a dose of this." The next bottle he took down had about 500 gigantic purple pills in it for horses with horse throats, it said on the label. The horse-throated horse should suck 1 pill twice a day. "Grandma may not have a horse throat," George said, "but she's certainly got a sharp tongue. Maybe they'll cure that instead." Into the saucepan went the 500 gigantic purple pills. Then there was a bottle of thick yellowish liquid. "For cows and bulls and bullocks," the label said. "Mange, crumpled horns, bad breath in bulls, earache, toothache, headache, hoofache, tailhache, and sore udders. That grumpy old cow in the living room has every one of those rotten illnesses," George said. She'll need it all. With a slop and a gurgle, the yellow liquid splashed into the now nearly full saucepan. The next bottle contained a brilliant red liquid, sheep tip, it said on the label, for sheep with sheep rot and for getting rid of ticks and fleas. Mix 1 spoonful in 1 gallon of water and slosh it over the sheep. Caution: do not make the mixture any stronger or the wool will fall out and the animal will be naked. By gum, said George, how I'd love to walk in and slosh it all over old Grandma and watch the ticks and fleas go jumping off her. But I mustn't, so she'll have to drink it instead. He poured the bright red medicine into the saucepan. The last bottle on the shelf was full of pale green pills. Pig pelts, the label announced, for the pigs with pork prickles, tender trotters, bristle blight, and swine sickness. Give 1 pill per day. In severe cases, 2 pills may be given, but more than that will make the pig rock and roll. Just the stuff, said George, for that miserable old pig back there in the house. She'll need a very big dose. He tipped all the green pills, hundreds and hundreds of them, into the saucepan. There was an old stick lying on the bench that had been used for stirring paint. George picked it up and started to stir his marvellous concoction. The mixture was as thick as cream, and as he stirred and stirred, many wonderful colors rose up from the depths and blended together: pinks, blues, greens, yellows, and browns. George went on stirring until it was all well mixed, but even so, there were still hundreds of pills lying on the bottom that hadn't melted, and there was his mother's splendid powder puff floating on the surface. I'll have to boil it all up, George said. 1 good quick boil in the stove is all it needs, and with that, he staggered back towards the house with the enormous heavy saucepan. On the way, he passed the garage, so he went in to see if he could find any other interesting things. He added up the following: half a pint of engine oil to keep Grandma's engine going smoothly, some antifreeze to keep her radiator from freezing up in winter, a handful of grease to grease her creaking joints. Then back to the kitchen. In the kitchen, George put the saucepan on the stove and turned up the gas flame underneath it as high as it would go. George, came the awful voice from the next room. It's time for my medicine. Not yet, Grandma, George called back. There's still 20 minutes before 11 o'clock. What mischief are you up to in there now? Granny screeched. I hear noises. George thought it best not to answer this one. He found a long wooden spoon in a kitchen drawer and began stirring hard. The stuff in the pot got hotter and hotter. Soon the marvellous mixture began to froth and foam. A rich blue smoke, color of peacocks, rose from the surface of the liquid, and a fiery, fearsome smell filled the kitchen. It made George choke and splutter. It was a smell unlike any he had smelled before. It was a brutal and a bewitching smell, spicy and staggering, fierce and frenzied, full of wizardry and magic. Whenever he got a whiff of it up his nose, free crackers went off in his skull and electric prickles ran along the backs of his legs. It was wonderful to stand there stirring this amazing mixture and to watch it smoking blue and bubbling and frothing and foaming as though it were alive. At one point, he could have sworn he saw black sparks flashing in the swirling foam. And suddenly, George found himself dancing around the steaming pot, chanting strange words that came into his head out of nowhere. Fury broth and witch's brew, foamy froth and riches blue, fume and spume and spoon drip spray, fizzle whistle about hooray, watch it sloshing, swashing, sploshing, hear it hissing, squishing, spissing, grandma better start to pray.